Hi, I'm Dick Miller, and my good friend Jeff Smith, Senator Smith, is here today. We haven't been together for maybe a month and a half, 2 months. Yeah. And we're recording this middle of August, and so we'll try to determine what things need to be reported to the people watching the TV today. First thing that we always have to touch base on is what's happening in the Senate. This may not take very long, but tell me what you think is happening.
So we are out of session. End of story. We've been out of session since the 1st of March, and something for everyone to maybe think about is that we are a legislature that takes a long vacation for campaigns. So it is what it is. So we're looking. Everything is looking forward to January and what will happen in January when we get back.
Yeah, it's a long vacation, but my guess is that most people are not vacationing who are up for re-election. You guys are probably knocking on doors.
It's true, but even Congress is still in session up until September of an election year.
Okay.
So yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, years ago, when I was a youngster, that's been 3 or 4 years ago, of course, in Iowa, they were just considered part-time.
Yeah.
They weren't full-time, and of course that's changed over the years, but I think that still exists in some states, that they're still part-time.
Yeah, it does.
Legislators.
If you know, there's all sorts of things to consider as whether people can take the time off to be there just for that part-time and still have their job back home, and a lot of things to balance.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. And I would guess that there are enough issues that one could be busy the full year instead of just part of a year.
We should be. We should be. But you know, I'm not going to spend my time here complaining about what we haven't done, and let's talk about what we could do, because yes, you're right. There's a lot of things that weren't done strictly out of politics.
Yeah.
Especially going into a campaign year, and legislature that is led by the Republican Party and the governor's office, which is Democrat, and so the legislature doesn't want to send things to the governor in this campaign year to help him get things done.
Yeah, yeah.
It's too bad politics get in the way.
Yeah, it is. It is. It really causes some really potential problems. We just finished with a primary. Any observations?
Probably no big surprises, but we do know now for certain who's on the ballot in every office. So we move on now to the general election. But speaking of the primary, I want to make a pitch for an idea that is a bill that I introduced last session and will reintroduce next session if I'm fortunate enough to come back. It's called Final Five voting. And you know that since you just experienced the primary and you were in the ballot, or in the voting booth, you had to choose one side or the other, Republican or Democrat. In this format, the Final Five, that would not be the case. You just pick out of the offices which person you like best, whether Republican or Democrat, because the top 5 of each office would move on to the general election. So there would probably be a lot more opportunity for independent party candidates and voters who oftentimes don't vote for the person that they really like because they assume that person has no chance, and then they pick, you know, someone that does. So then when you get to the general election, excuse me, then when you get to the general election, you actually rank those top 5 or those 5. Again, you could pick that person you like the most, even if they probably don't have much of a chance, although it might surprise you under this format. But if your top choice is it comes out 5th, and we don't have a winner yet because you got to get over 50%. Well, then your second choice gets your vote in the next round. So it goes on like that until someone gets over 50%. So it changes the tenor of the campaign, changes the way, because candidates need to appeal to everybody if they want to get their second choice. And so it's a lot nicer. And it same goes with after the election. The parties lose their power over, much of their power over the legislators. It really gets back in the hands of the people who gain power from this.
Okay, now, if you would clarify a little bit about that process. So when you come to the election in November,
yes,
you're going to rank, order your the candidates. Okay. Now, when you say second round, how is that handled?
Because in the first round, likely with 5 candidates particularly, maybe there won't be 5, but that's the number that can move on. But even so, you're not likely to have a winner someone get over 50% of the vote.
Right.
So then you eliminate the person who got the least number of votes.
Oh, sure.
Right. So if there's 4 left or 3 left, your vote moves on to your second or third choice.
So the numbers mean more.
And your vote counts. More likely your vote is going to still count. And I think a lot of people would be happy with that. But I think for the most part, it's the idea of taking a lot of that power away from the parties.
Well, one thing I think today with the primaries as we see them is that a very small number get to pick the candidate who runs.
That's right.
If you could say the Democratic Party, for example, where you normally have 50% people voting in November, 20% could vote in August
for the primary.
And then you have 20% deciding who's going to be on the final ballot. Then.
Yeah, and that's exact. So think about that. This year was the highest number of voters in a primary almost in history, but I think 40 years or something like that. And it was about 25%. 25%, and that's the highest number we've had come vote in a primary. That is just not acceptable. We've got to find a system that people have more faith in and have an opportunity to vote for whom they really like. And this is a really great idea. Alaska adopted this. They're the first state to adopt it. We had a hearing, which was encouraging, but we didn't get a vote. But Alaska adopted it, and we'll be seeing them run through this now. We probably already had the primary, and we'll see in the general election. But we'll see how it changes the dynamics in Alaska.
Interesting. I think if we had a larger turnout for primaries, it would be more who we want. You know, if you had 50-60% of people turning out, then there would be a better process of picking that person who, say, the majority really wants to be running on the
potentially.
Yeah, but people aren't turning out.
Right.
And
right. So the opportunity for even a second, because you could have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, all move on.
Move on to the.
So in other words, then you get to where the majority is voting in the general election, and that's an important aspect of this too. So that's when we see who's really the most popular or relates to most voters.
Well, in a sense, the party becomes a little less important. Today, it's all important.
Yeah, too important.
Yeah.
I'd be the first to tell you that.
Yeah. Well, and I think years ago, I remember voting. There were so many more people voted for the individual, not just party. Of course, some of us may have been strictly party, but there was a lot of voting for the candidate.
Yeah.
And
I still hear once in a while someone tells me, but less and less people tell me that. I vote for the person, not the party. But the more you talk to someone like that, you generally kind of get the feeling that that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's not their fault. It's just not easy right now.
Well, and your choices are really pretty limited.
They are.
You know, if you only have I'll pick on your situation. You were the only Democrat, and so there was no contest. Your opponent, who will be on the November ballot, had no opposition in the primary.
Right.
So the choices were not as large as they were in, for example, the U.S. Senate race in Alaska.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of candidates running there.
And that's where it's happening. And that's why it's happening. It already made a difference.
Yeah.
Challenging an incumbent,
Mm-hmm.
that's, that's a good example.
And I think the incumbent normally has a bit of a head start. And I think you had pointed out, where else do you find a job that allows you to take time off to campaign?
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's an interesting concept. It's too bad there aren't more experiments throughout the country in that area.
It's something is really getting people's attention. And more, I talk about it every chance I get.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of national, including the Veterans for Innovative Politics, or for Political Innovation. That's what it is. They are very much engaged in this. This is their number one idea that they want to see passed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I want to move on here.
Yes.
I've got a rather interesting question for you here.
All right.
I'll word it in such a fashion that it'll confuse all of us. How's that?
All right.
Since this is a campaign season, I think this is appropriate. And it may be appropriate to ask any and every candidate out there, because I think we have a better idea of what they stand for and what areas of concern they have in terms of good government. And that is, if you have the ear, both ears, of the majority leader and the minority leader. Now that would be quite a chore, wouldn't it? But if you have the ear of both these leaders in the Wisconsin Senate, what 6 items of or for legislation would you advise them to place on the front burner, and why?
6.
Well, I would be happy with fewer, but I'll give you 6 as an opportunity.
Let's see where we go. You're right. When I hear that question, I think of the urgency of things. So what's the most urgent? Let's start it with that. Right now, it seems to be the most urgent thing we can address is our climate. Some people still don't want to believe that, but it is absolutely true. Just look at today. Today is August 18th, and we have relatives in Texas who've been going through this terrible heat and drought, extreme drought. But you know what's on the news today? They are expecting 5 inches of rain today and 14 inches of rain over the next several days, and now they have flood
warnings out
for the next week or so. So you're going to see this after today. We haven't seen it yet, but we'll see if that's reality. But when you watch the show, it might have already happened. We're getting extreme weather. Nobody can argue that. And we're running out of time. As all the scientists will tell you, we're running out of time. We need to do the right things. Our job as a government is to incentivize individuals and businesses and all of us to take this seriously for our future. So that's important. I'm on the Climate Change Task Force and introduced a number of bills. Our democracy. I mean, these are big topics. Maybe not so much that we're hitting the details, but we know so I'll just skip through that pretty quickly because I just talked about Final 5 voting. I think that can really change a lot of things if the people you elect actually start working together, because I think that's the thing that I hear most often. Why don't you work together? Why can't you guys just work together? Well, that's right now because the majority party has so much power, they are able to control their members to the point where we don't even have a beer together, we don't have dinner together, even though we are stuck down there overnight, during the week. And that wasn't always the case, and I think I've talked about that before, but they know that if we were to get to know each other on a personal basis, it would be a lot less likely that we would not work together, or that, you know, it's more likely we would work together if we got to know each other on a personal basis and trust each other. And, you know, it makes a big difference, right? Throughout life, it's about building relationships and trust. So that, I think, is really important. So democracy I'm concerned about. I know there's people who will watch this who think different than I do about the 2020 election. And moving forward, though, we have to be cognizant that if we don't trust our elections and trust the people who count those votes, we don't have a democracy, and we're going to be in big trouble. So that's really important. The economy, and that we probably could hit all 6 things just in the economy, right? I see we're making advancements in broadband. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about that. That's been a top priority in my office for rural broadband, because if we're going to have our rural communities that we remember, and not some right now there's concerns that some of them are really struggling, we need to be able to have that access through the internet and have that fiber into the homes and into so the broadband has a big part of the economy. Actually, childcare is huge. I just sat through a round table the other day about childcare, particularly in rural districts and areas like this. This was a Western Wisconsin roundtable on that topic, because how does that affect the economy? People are unable to go back to work when they can't find childcare, or childcare. We heard these stories. One particularly sticks in my mind, that they found that after paying for childcare, they were bringing home $25 a month. It just wasn't worth it for the travel and all those things as well, to bring their child and all those things. So they're staying home. When we talk about a workforce shrinkage, that's a big part of it, besides the fact that people from our generation are retiring. Mm-hmm. That's huge too. But we also should be looking at, for instance, in Osseo, I went to a ribbon cutting on Sunday for their new technology school for attached to the high school, to teach and give them a leg up on the new ways of manufacturing and making things, and that's robotics and all the other things that go into it. It's really exciting, and they're attached to the technical college. So our trades and technical education we should be supporting as much as we can, to be sure that people have the next generations have a lot of choices and are well trained and ready for the workforce. So the economy is huge in so many ways, and there's so many things that we can do to address those things. When someone asks me at the door or anywhere else what I stand for, there's it's such a long list of things, so I even ask them. So I'd even ask you, Dick, what do you think we should be addressing that really concerns you?
Yeah, and just prior to coming on, we were talking a few minutes about the questionnaires that come out from both parties. They'll ask what their constituents, their priorities, and I would agree with you on the very first one. Probably is the environment, because if the environment changes too drastically, it's going to throw the whole world into chaos.
Yeah.
Shortage of food, shortage of water. And you mentioned the extreme in Texas, and here in is it Arizona where Lake Mead is?
Right.
That's drying up.
Drying up.
So here you have that extreme. Europe has had hotter temperatures than ever on record. I just caught something on the radio coming up that said that 70% of the people in this country are concerned about the environment, but 30% make a lot of noise. They don't believe it's possible. I would rather err in favor of taking care of it if we are wrong.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes people need to see something.
Yeah.
And touch it. Yeah. And that just isn't always the case unless you go out west and see those. Their sources of water are drying out. Yeah. That is probably the best example. Of course, the fires are worse every year.
Sure.
I mean, it's and where are they going to get their water?
Yeah.
They're going to get it. They're going to be, trying to get it from here.
Yeah.
That's going to become the big issue. Should we pump it out of the Great Lakes until they dry up? I mean, is that the solution? No. We shouldn't be dumping it on the next generations, and that may be a few generations down the road that concern might happen. But still, we need. And actually, this is an interesting take on this, though. You go out west and you realize that California became this major dairy state, for instance, and agricultural state. Why? Because, of course, year-round they can produce. But they don't have the water. They're using up their water.
Well, in fact, they're cutting way back on agricultural water.
They need to be bringing that agriculture back here.
Yeah. Where
you actually are close to the water instead of trying to bring the water to there. I thought that was a really interesting perspective I recently heard from someone, and I think they're probably right.
Well, and people have moved to the areas like that because of the weather, but we are not the best long-term planners or thinkers.
No.
And what is that going to cause? I spent time in the service in San Diego, in that area. I have family out there, and people obviously over the years have just piled out there because the weather is so great. But they're having to share their drinking water with the long season growing that they have there, and it just isn't there. And I think that to me that's number one. We won't have a democracy if we do have a catastrophe due to the climate change. So that's why I would put, and I think you kind of mentioned our democracy as perhaps second, and I think I would fall in line with your thinking there. I guess I want to feel this is the place in the world I want to live. Up to this point, I've felt good about this country, and up to this. Let me just go back. A few years ago, I started thinking things aren't going as well as they should, and like in the state. We'll maybe go back to that. It used to be, and this is before we got moved into this century, that we may have had a governor who was Republican, and we may have had legislatures that were Democrat, and they worked together. They both took credit for the good things that were passed. Now it seems like it's a competition. Don't let the other guy do anything great or good.
That's right.
We don't want to brag up that Democrat or brag up that Republican. We want to brag up the government is what we want to do.
Yeah, and an example would be Tommy Thompson in the 90s, which is what you're thinking of, right? So Tommy, and I did recently talk to him about this. I said, you need to write a manual for the legislature to understand how you're supposed to work and get things passed with a governor from the other side of the aisle, because he did that, because the legislature was mostly Democrat back in those days, and he was a Republican governor. But you know where he came from? The legislature. So he understood that. He was a legislative leader in the 80s until he got elected governor. So he knew how legislation needed to work to get passed, and how you had to have compromise and work together. That's all people ask. If I'm on the side of the road and people stop and talk to me like I always ask them to do, if they take the time to have that conversation, we find out, and they find out, that we're not far apart in what we want. We may have maybe far apart sometimes in how to get there, but that's what we expect. That's what we expect from your politics too, right? That's why in the end you hopefully bring those things together, those ideas together, and take the best parts of the ideas so that we can move on and make progress. And right now we're not doing that, and that's where our government is failing.
Yeah. I think my third, we haven't hit 6, have we?
No. I was hoping you'd come up with 3 more.
But the funny thing is that you and I kind of share some of the same, very much the same concerns. I think I'm going to touch on immigration, if I may.
Sure.
because that does apply. It's not just obviously it's not just a federal issue, because what's happening right now is that they're busing some of these immigrants up to New York, Washington D.C. or I think New York City, and so this has become a state thing, or it has been for years, because the bordering states, of course, have been significantly affected over the years. But here we are, we're sitting in an environment where we're short of employees, very short. If you go around any community, you see signs, help wanted. And what they're saying is, help wanted, good hard-working help. That's what we all say when we advertise.
Yeah.
And being on the county board here, we took a tour of, and I'm going to, maybe I shouldn't touch onto this, but we took a tour of Ashley Furniture here recently, and there weren't many lines operating at that time of the day, but there were lines where they had many Hispanic workers, and I'll tell you what, they were working hard. They were just moving, and that's what we all want, is good, solid employees.
And we know the dairy industry won't survive without them.
And those folks want to work. I mean, they're here to work, and they want hours.
They came here to better their own lives for their family. And it's not any different than what many of our families did when they came from Europe. And so I always say that ocean that they crossed and everything they left behind, and for same reasons, whether they were persecuted for religion or politics, or they were starving for whatever reason, they left family behind. Wasn't their first choice. That's not what they would have wanted to do, but this they saw as opportunity to come here. So they crossed an ocean. Many didn't even survive the crossing. Same thing with the desert south of us. That's the way I look at it.
Well,
They're crossing that desert, and it's a dangerous thing to do.
You have to think that these are some of the most motivated people on earth to go through that trial, to better themselves and their family, have a future. So anyway, that's the important thing, I guess, in my book. We're getting close to the end.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. I'm glad to be included in these things, discussions. I want to thank you for coming today. I know you've been busy, and I think we'll try to schedule another get-together here next month, if at all possible. It's a busy season. Remember, school starts, what, in the next week or two? And
September 1st start date for schools, from what I understand, and you know, and the football games are starting tonight, and so have fun, enjoy it.
Okay, thank you, and thank you. I thank the audience for being with us today, and look forward to fall weather coming. Bye now.